inventory. So Rod, take it away.
All right, thanks, Kim. Like Kim said, we are here to cover the inventory counts in Microsoft Dynamics GP. We're going to be doing this at a fairly introductory level, and we're going to be talking about the out-of-the-box software. There are some other options out there if you're doing more advanced warehousing, but this is really to control your cycle counts, your physical counts, your year-end counts. Okay. The agenda for today is we're going to go through some quick introductions. We're going to talk about inventory configurations that can affect your counts. We're going to talk about preparing for a count, recording the count, and then we're going to cover some questions, any questions you may have. With that said, I am a very informal person, so if you have any questions, please feel free to chat them out to Kim, and she'll let us know at any point throughout the process if there are questions. So let's jump right in. Introductions. My name, like Kim said, is Rod O'Connor. I've been working with GP for about 9 years now, off and on. I did jump around a couple of other products that I probably shouldn't mention in these webinars. But GP's always been one of my favorite products to work with. So I have worked as a consultant. I work as a consultant right now. But I've also worked as an end user, and that's how I really got involved with GPUG in the first place. All right, so let's jump right in. Let's talk about inventory setups that can affect your count. So not all of them will affect your count. You may choose, and you'll see this throughout the process, you may choose to use them to organize and set up your counts, and then some of them do directly affect how your count works. So the first one that we have to look at is inventory control. And as you can see with each of these screenshots, I've actually put the menu map. I've been around for a while. I don't always use the desktop layouts, but they pretty closely mimic the actual menus. So these are the actual menu items that you'll select across the top. Excuse me. I should probably also note I'm using GP 2013 R2 for these samples. For this functionality, it should match what you see, whatever version you're on, with the possible exception that this ribbon bar is probably much prettier. So within our inventory control, which can be found under Tools, Setup, Inventory, Inventory Control, there's three real settings that can affect what your count looks like. The first is multiple bins. So that one's pretty straightforward. If you have multiple bins enabled, you're going to have to select bins throughout your count process. You're going to have to record your inventory against the individual bins. It does give you the flexibility of controlling your counts by ranges of bins, so that if you're sorting your bins by aisle, by zone, however you're sorting those bins, we can actually set up cycle counts so that each day you count a particular zone or a particular aisle, or each week or each month, or however you run your cycle counts. The next one is auto post stock count variances, which is right here. What that one does, basically when I process my stock count, it's going to create an inventory variance adjustment. This checkbox here tells me whether or not I have to then go and post the inventory transaction as well. Some people like to turn it off because they want to review that inventory variance adjustment before it gets posted to their stock, before it gets posted to their general ledger. Personally, I like to turn it on. I feel it adds unnecessary mouse clicks to the process, but it's going to be a preference for you and your business. The last one is display cost for decrease adjustments, and that one really only affects it from a display standpoint if you are not auto-posting the stock count variances. Showing the cost for the decrease adjustments, if I'm looking at the unposted variance entry, that's where it's going to either show me the cost or wait until you try to post it before it creates the decrease adjustment cost. So those are the three fields that we needed to look at for the inventory control. Next, we want to look at the item master. So there's a few things within these screens that can affect your counts. The first are really about sorting and grouping. So generic description and class ID Both of those are really used when, you'll see when we create our count schedules, we can use those in selecting the items to be counted. So if I, for example, I had one customer that they made dental implants. So their technicians tended to have precious metals sitting on their desks, gold and such for teeth. So anyway, they would want to count the precious metals daily, basically, so that they knew what was being used and what they had on hand, and most importantly, if any of it went missing. And then they had other items where they really didn't need to count them very often, so we could use the class to identify the precious metals to make sure that we were counting those on a daily basis. The next thing is item type. You can only do a stock count for sales inventory or discontinued items. Okay, so if you have services or something created as services or non-inventory, you won't be able to record a stock count against those because it doesn't keep a stock of those items. So if you've set up any of the items in your tool shed as non-inventory items, you're not going to be able to perform cycle counts on those within the standard GP. Next, if we click on the Options button, it's going to bring up our item maintenance options, and right here is the ABC code. So we can use, like any good system, we can use the ABC codes to identify or group for selection purposes. So I may count my A items weekly, my B items monthly, and my C items, I just count them when the auditor shows up at the end of the year. Another thing that affects the outcome of our count is under the Accounts button. So we're still in the item maintenance. Under the Accounts button, we've got this variance field. So I mentioned earlier, what your cycle count is going to create is an inventory variance transaction. So the offset is going to be your variance account and your inventory account. That's going to be your journal entry. The next one that a lot of people tend not to know about, and I got to be honest, I had to go out and find it in the help book, is this stock count button right here. So we're going to go into our cards, inventory, quantity sites, and within there you've got the stock count button. Now to get to it, you're going to have to select your item number and a specific warehouse, a specific site ID. This field is managed per item, per site ID, obviously, like I just said. And what it allows us to do when we click on the button is set the count interval days. So later on in the presentation, I'm going to show you how the schedule itself will select when is the next time I need to count these items. And that is based entirely on what is the count date and what is the stock count interval days for the items within. Generally, you're going to want to set some kind of standard based on class or based on however you operate so that you know that all of the items within a particular count schedule have the same number of count interval days. Okay, a couple of things about preparing for the count. First is, and this one's outside the system, and it's a fairly standard one. I apologize if it's too standard. You're going to want to freeze the actual inventory to be counted. So close off the zone, close off the aisle, the bins, whatever your cycle count process is. Make sure folks aren't walking in there and taking stuff away just in case you want to recount. No shipping or receiving during year-end counts. Lots of different ways that companies work around this. If you're in a bigger warehouse and your count takes a couple days, quite often what we'll do is pre-pick, pre-pack, and pre-record the shipments and have everything sitting on the dock in a particular spot that's not going to be counted. Receiving is pretty easy, just to leave stuff on the dock and not physically receive it into the system. That's the easiest one. For myself, I like to make sure that we clear the put-away bins if possible. So before we do our count, if there's something sitting in a put-away bin, let's actually put it away. I don't like to send counters to the put-away bins. I'm going to be honest, that's probably a personal opinion, and there's probably someone out there guffawing right now or something. but it is what it is. Those are the three things I would do about making sure that basically the physical inventory is ready to be counted. The next thing is I want to try to post all the inventory related transactions within GP. So all the sales orders, all the sales order shipments that I can post, I want to post them. All the POP, purchase order transactions, receipts, returns, whatever they are, I want to try to make sure they're posted, and obviously the inventory control transactions as well. Now, you're going to see a window later on. It's not the end of the world if we have unposted transactions, so we don't have to shut down the business necessarily while we do these counts. It's much easier. Everything's easier if you can just stop the world and do your count, but let's be honest, the world doesn't always stop for us. So I like to make sure the journal entries are posted as well. What I find is generally after the warehouse manager hands over their physical counts, one of the first things the accountants do is go check the general ledger. So I just like to make sure that my journal entries are posted. So if you're not posting through, make sure you go and post the journal entries as well. And then process the ABC analysis if that's your practice. So if you're basing any of your inventory counts on your ABC analysis and you do it more frequently than annual, you're going to want to make sure that you run it. Okay. ABC analysis itself, I didn't want to dig into it too much, but I did want to show folks where it was. It could honestly be its own session. Maybe Kim will set up a 1, 2, 3 session on this one. It's under Tools, Routines, Inventory, Item, ABC Analysis. And you can see that we can base your ABC on either usage value, usage quantity, on-hand inventory value, or unit cost. So there's lots of different ways that you can go for the out-of-the-box ABC. Now, if your business calculates their ABC a different way, I mentioned the precious metals company. I had another company I worked with that they tended to kit their items and they wanted to count based on the value as a kit, which GP obviously doesn't do out of the box. So what we can do is create a custom ABC analysis using something like SQL and just update the ABC field. The count doesn't rely on you having used the out-of-the-box ABC analysis. It does rely on you having values in the ABC fields if you're going to be grouping that way. So just something to think about when you're talking about grouping your inventory and calculating inventory turns or anything like that. So that's pretty much all of the setups that are going to affect our inventory counts. Let's talk about actually doing the inventory counts. So there's really, it looks like more steps than there is, to be honest. We're going to create or update our stock count schedule. The schedule tells us what items we have to count and how often. We're going to start the count. Sounds like a step, but it's really just a button, so don't be scared. We're going to enter our counted values. Probably in between starting the count and entering our values, we'll have actually counted. We're going to process the count, which is really recording it in the system, and then we are going to post. So let's go see what all that looks like. All right. Now what I'm going to do, I did take screenshots so that when we get to posting this thing on the GPUG, all of the screenshots are there. I will probably jump back and forth between GP and my screenshots, so bear with me. Creating the actual stock count schedule, we're going to go to Transactions, Inventory, Stock Count Schedule. It's really ominously named. So within our stock count schedule, we're going to set up an ID. Now, IDs, just like any other ID in the system, you can create your own logic, you can have no logic. It's really up to you. There's no rules. You can see here I created one just called GPUG. We're going to give it a description, just like everything. So you might have weekly cycle counts or a group as your description. You may have just your annual count. Whatever your stock count schedules are, that's what we're going to do. Notice the status here. Status is going to be either available, which means, yeah, I can work with it, is going to be started, which means somebody's performing a count for this particular schedule right now, or it's going to be processing, which means somebody clicked on process. Okay. Over here, our default site ID. Now, a stock count doesn't have to be restricted to one particular location. So if you think about one physical location that's maybe represented in your system as multiple logical locations. Some companies that I've worked with have set up the RMA section of their warehouse as a separate location ID, site ID within GP. It's still one physical building, but it's kept separate for the book purposes. Perhaps you have a in-transit bin if you ship overseas and you've got a container sitting out in the backyard. That becomes, although it's part of your main warehouse, you generally will treat that as a separate warehouse. In any of those cases, we can have one stock count schedule cover multiple site IDs within GP. The default just says, if I go down here and select an individual item, by default, what site ID am I going to put in there? Reuse stock count. Now, if this is a one-time stock count, we're being purchased, so we're going to count all of our stock, we don't turn that on. But if this is our weekly count or our monthly count, we're going to want that turned on so that we don't have to do this every single time we come in. So that's what the reuse stock count does. Last used date is automatically populated, and that just means when did I count this last. All right, so the mass add window, let's actually go out and see this one in action. You can see here that I can mass add, and that means just add a whole bunch of items at the same time. I can mass add based on a number of things. So I can mass add on site ID, ABC, item class, item number, generic description we talked about, description, item type, and next stock count date. Now, the next stock count date, if I have different cycles for each of my items, I don't necessarily have to set up a stock count schedule. I can just say, what am I supposed to count this week based on the number of counts? Sorry, the last count date combined with the stock count interval days. I'm actually going to jump out to my GP. So for those not on GP 2013, this is what it looks like. Hello. Where we're going to go for our schedules, it's right here under Transactions, Stock Count Schedule. I had already given you Transactions, Inventory, Stock Count Schedule from the menu. Okay, so if I want to mass add items, what I can do is drop down this list, and I can actually do multiple criteria, which is why I wanted to show it to you this way. It's much better this way than in a screenshot, to be honest. I know I have items in my main warehouse, and I may choose to do, on top of this, all of my A items. But what I'm going to choose is all of my A to C items. So if they have an ABC code of none, so they don't meet any of the criteria, I don't want to count them. And if I wanted to, I could add maybe a item number range or something like that. Once I click on this Add button, it goes through all of my inventory. That's what all that screen flashy stuff was. And it finds all the items that met the criteria that I entered, and now here they are in my count. Okay, so you can see I've got a whole whack of stuff on here. Okay, once I'm done with that, I can save this stock count schedule, and now every time I try to use that schedule, it will include all of these items at these warehouses, at these sites. You can see here some of these items actually have a next count date, which means they were counted at some point, and they have a stock count interval days set up. Now, I don't want to save this, Actually, I'll just go ahead and save it. Okay, back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so starting the count, I mentioned it is literally one button. As long as I have a status of available on my stock count schedule, and it's the exact same stock count schedule window we've been in all along, I can go ahead and click on the Start Count button. Now, after I've started a count, just so you know, there is a Cancel Count button right here. I can cancel a count at any time. So if I've gotten into it and found out I didn't have the right SKUs, I didn't have the right locations, whatever, I can cancel the count and start again. Now, after I click on that button, there's going to be a number of reports and such that pop up. So the first one is going to be my stock count exception list. Then it's going to be my stock count print options. So if you take a look under the stock count forms button, radio button here, I can page break between items. So I can literally have one item per page. If I have multiple bins, it would print all the bins where I expect to find that item. And then my users could then go out and count. Or if I don't turn that on, I'm going to get one long list with all of my items on it. Print on-hand quantities. If I'm doing a blind count, I'm going to leave that turned off. If I want my users to know what I expect to be there, then I'll turn that on, and it'll obviously print the on-hand quantities. Now, if you want to fully blind count where you're not showing them either the SKU or the item that, or the quantity that you expect to find in a particular bin, that's actually a custom report. We've built something similar for other people, and pretty much anybody in your IT department or your partner could most likely set up a pretty quick SSRS report to meet your needs for a fully blind count. In this case, though, Microsoft gives us the option to at least exclude the quantities that we expect to find. And do we want to print the item lot or serial numbers? If we do have serialized items or lot tracked items, we can print those on here. Again, that kind of goes against our whole blind count theory, but it's there as an option if we choose to turn it on. It's also going to print, it's going to ask us where to send those stock count forms. Okay. The exception list will print first. You don't normally find very many exceptions. It will tell you with the description here exactly what you need to do. I obviously didn't have any in my sample. That's really easy when you control it by including only one SKU. All right, and then it prints my stock count form. So this is what I would print off to paper, attach it to my clipboard, send it out into the warehouse with the folks who are going to be doing the counting. Okay, you can see it's expecting, it's showing us our item number, a description, what is our base unit of measure, how many they're counting. It's asking for a unit of measure here. So if you sold, let's say screws, a package of screws is 10 eaches. Box of screws is 10 packages. You're not going to ask the guys to break it down and tell me there were 1,000 screws. You're going to say how many boxes of screws were there, and they can write it down right here. The system you'll see later on when we're actually doing the entry, we can change the unit of measure for what we're counting. If you are so inclined, you can actually record the date and time that you counted, so that from an audit perspective, if I'm going to do this twice, do a double count, what I can do is compare how much time was in between the two counts, and also if there's a discrepancy between the two, perhaps somebody walked down the aisle and took away one of the boxes of screws so they could send it out to a customer. It would help me narrow all that down. So now we're at a point where we're actually entering our count within the system. Okay, so by default when you come in, like most windows, the grid is actually at one line that's visible. I'd like to expand it for screenshots just so we can talk about what all is here and what all you can do. Notice here that the auto post stock count variances is turned on. That's because it was turned on in my configuration. Notice as well that the reuse stock count is turned on. That was the choice I made when I created the schedule. At this point, I cannot turn either of those off. Oops. Sorry, I jumped ahead there, guys. At this point, I can't turn either of those off. They were controlled up front. They're just there to let me know that that's what's going to happen. So down here will be a full list of what was included in our stock count schedule. This was the schedule that we already set up and we already talked about. We can control the way the items are sorted down here. We can go by site bin item number or item number site bin. Those are our choices. It's going to pre-populate our unit of measure, our SKU, based on everything that we selected, which was based on the default. Our counted quantity and variance quantity will default to 0. It's going to expect us to actually physically fill those in. Our count date and count time, you're going to see in a second how we can set a default count date and time. And then down here it shows us the captured quantity. So when I clicked on Start, what the system did was it actually took a snapshot of all of the items that were contained within my schedule. So it took a look at what was on hand, captured that in the background, and excuse me, is showing it to us now. The on-hand quantity is the on-hand quantity right now, and we'll talk about why that's relevant in a second. So first let's talk about setting a default count date and a default count time. If I click on the expansion arrow right to the right of document date, it's going to open up my stock count date entry window. My default count date can be established right here. It doesn't have to be today. If we did the count yesterday and I'm recording it today, I'm going to put yesterday as my default count date. Let's talk about the actual quantities that we're entering. So you can see here I highlighted that I put in a counted quantity of 3. Now, based on the fact that my captured quantity is 1, it auto-calculated a variance quantity of 2. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that my variance is actually 2. I should probably do a little bit of analysis to make sure that there actually is a variance going on. To help us with that analysis, we've got these 2 buttons down here in the red, the unposted transactions button and the transaction history. So I mentioned earlier when I was saying that we should probably try to post all of our inventory transactions up front, if possible. If we haven't and if we weren't able to, we can actually review the unposted transactions here. So we're going to select the line that we want to review, and then we're going to click on the unposted transactions button. What that's going to show us is everything currently in the system that affects this item number that has not yet been posted. So we can see here we've got a BOM assembly where this item is being used. We've got a couple of sales transactions, an order and an invoice, both unposted, that are both using this particular SKU, and we have a standard invoicing module entry that's also using this item. So any one of those items could have consumed an inventory, a unit of this item, and really if our variance was negative, it's an understandable negative variance because really there's probably up to 4 items here, 4 units here that have been consumed based on these transactions. The next button that we had beside it was the transaction history button, and that brings up the item inquiry by date window that you can see right here. Now by default, it's going to default to the dates associated particularly with our count. So you can see that we've had a couple of transactions here that affected this particular SKU. If I click on the document date all button, what that's going to do for me is show me everything from the dawn of time for this particular SKU. So I can take a look and see, maybe I have a particular date range that I do want to look at, something that may have affected my count as well. Now, once I've looked at those items and I've decided that my variance is valid or not, what I can do, I can actually override the variance. So if you take a look at these highlighted fields here, up here is my counted quantity. I counted 3. Down here is my captured quantity of 1. When I reviewed my unposted transactions with my transaction history, I decided that the variance of 2 was incorrect and that in fact there was no variance. I can override that with a 0. Or I could override it with a 10, I could override it with 1,000. The appropriate number is whatever. Fact is, you can override it. Notice this verified checkbox here too. By default, that turns on. You can actually unverify the number if you like. If you're going to go back and count it again, that just lets you know that until you have counted it, you're going to turn that off. I also wanted to talk about the distribution. So when we looked at the item master cards earlier, we said that we were going to use the inventory account and the variance account. And you can see that these are the default accounts from that item master. At this point, if I really need to, I can actually override the variance account. So if I know that the variance of 2 that we calculated earlier, obviously I took the screenshot in order, if I know that the variance of 2 was because we ate them internally, we make chocolate bars and we use them at lunch, I can actually override this variance account at this point and have it hit my internal use GL account so that I know when it gets posted to the GL, it's at least going to get posted with the right GL accounts for what the expense needs to be. Once I've completed entering all of my counts, excuse me, it's time to process the count. So when I process, the system is going to create my inventory variance transaction. We already talked about that. If the auto post stock count variances was switched off, the variance transaction is going to be an unposted entry, obviously. It's going to calculate the next count date based on that stock count interval days. So it's going to take the count date that you assign to the line item. So imagine one of those counts that maybe takes 2 or 3 days. It's your year-end inventory count. What you can do is have it say, if my interval days are 30 days, each of the items that I count on day 1, I would have day 1's date, day 2's date, and what's going to happen is my inventory count days, sorry, my next inventory count date will probably be a day separated. It's going to store the stock count history. The stock count history gets used in the accuracy comparison report. We're going to take a quick look at the comparison report in a couple minutes. But basically what that report does is looks back over history and say, for this SKU, we're usually pretty accurate or not very accurate at all. It's not going to rest the schedule status. It's going to reset the schedule status. Anyone who's on this call that knows me knows that I'm mortified right now because I'm usually pretty anal about that. It's going to reset the schedule status to available if the reused stock count equal true. So if I didn't set that stock count batch, or sorry, the stock count schedule to be reused, what's going to happen is it's just going to go away. It's just going to disappear after I process. If it is set to reuse, it's going to recreate itself and reset the status back. And then it's going to print a whack of reports. I think there's about 6 reports that it tries to print when I process. Okay, so going back to our stock count entry window, transactions, inventory, stock count entry, we're going to click on the process button. One thing that I will mention before we go forward, the clear count right here will literally do that. Any counted quantities or variances that I've entered will be reset back to 0, and I'll be asked to start again. So if you've made a mistake on one line, you probably don't want to click that. If you made a mistake on 20 lines, it's worth considering. When I click on Process, these are, yeah, it was 6. These are the reports that you're going to start to run. So you're going to get the Inventory Transaction Journal, Transaction GL Register, the Cost Variance Journal, General Posting Journal, Stock Count Exception Report, and GL Breakdown Register. Now, what I would do is talk to your accounting department, talk to your auditors, talk to whoever generally ends up looking at these reports, and find out which ones they're actually going to look at. Not all of them will be required, but they're all there. So you may want to just cancel 3 of them and just take the exception report, the posting journal, and the cost variance if there is any. So I didn't take screenshots of all the individual reports that get printed. I didn't think we all needed to go through that. The first one, though, is the exception list, and you can see at this point it's just telling me the batch got created, here's the batch number, and the adjustments were added to it. Here's the variance transaction number. Okay, that's important for when I want to go and look that up later on. This is my inventory transaction post. So it's just going to tell me here's all the SKUs that were here, here's the quantity that I'm adjusting, the cost that's being used, what are the GL accounts that got hit. So again, this is a good report to keep on file somewhere just so that you can explain away what happened with this transaction. And by keep on file, I mean PDF in a folder somewhere. And then our distribution breakdown. I just like to look at this. I just wanted to show you that you can see we did debit our inventory account and we credited our shrinkage and waste account in this case because we were increasing our inventory by 2. All right, just so you know it worked. You don't have to do this every time. It doesn't have to be part of your process. But I went back to the inventory transaction inquiry window. I found a variance transaction, transaction number 1. You may remember it from such screenshots as the exception report earlier today. And here's my adjustment, positive 2, 329 for this site ID. Also, so you know it worked and that I wasn't making it up, we have calculated our next count date, which is May 25th, 30 days out from our last count. And here's our last use date of April 12th, which is anyone who knows Fabricam or the World Online. When you log into that, it sets your date to April 12th, 2017. So pretty much every screenshot I've ever made has been dated April 12th, 2017. At this point, we've really covered off our cycle count. We've gone from creating our schedule to processing our count to reviewing the reports. I do want to show you one quick report because it's not always easy to find. If I go to my inventory analysis reports, let me just minimize this, which can be found under reports, analysis. I'm in inventory, by the way. And then I'm going to drop down this reports list, and it's way down here at the bottom, my accuracy comparison. And if I go ahead and run this, you can see here's my actual count accuracy report, and it just tells me what adjustments have been made and what is the total cost. There's lots of options there, and we could probably spend the next 20 minutes going through them, but this is a report that you can play with, or you can work with your partner and build some pretty decent Excel or smart list based reports, or even the SSRS reports to really analyze some of the accuracy and any of the adjustments that were made over time. So with that said, we're at a good time to start asking questions, and I'm hoping somebody out there has some.
Excellent. All right. So again, on the right-hand side You can type in your questions, and we do have some, so let us begin. All right, here's one. We are currently performing our year-end inventory process. Oh boy, that's fun. And adjusting counts in our warehouse. When I post the batches from the financial series, GP then automatically creates a batch in the financial series labeled as GL transaction and then a bunch of zeros. Within these transactions, there are penny adjustments for several closed fiscal periods, as well as incomplete GL accounts. We are curious as to how and why this automated batch was created. Why is it trying to post transactions to a prior fiscal period, and also the transaction references IVA, STCK, and PA. PA we know comes from project accounting. But as far as we know, we only use this for payroll, and all PA referenced cost adjustments have been incomplete GL transactions, and we do not know how inventory adjusts are affecting anything from project accounting. Would you be able to shed some light on the issue at the end of the webinar, please? That's a big one.
Wow. That is a really long and involved question. So if I understood correctly, you process your year-end close, and you're picking up transactions from previous periods. I got to be honest, I'd have to take a look at some of the configurations. I'd want to take a look at some of the configurations before chiming in on the PA. If you haven't processed any inventory transactions, I am surprised to have them picked up. I know John is on the call. John, did you pick up anything on that you'd like to speak about? I think that might be an offline question.
All right. John, I took you off of mute. John?
Oh, we lost him.
Yes, I am.
Okay. So John, basically what I was saying was I'm not sure that I have enough from that question to be able to answer it smartly. I didn't know if maybe you caught anything in there that you'd like to comment on.
I think I'll put John back on mute. I think he
Yeah.
is answering somebody else's question. I do think that's a personal setup because not your typical. So Brent, my recommendation is to reach out to Rod and have a discussion on that because it does sound like setup. Here's another one. Will the saved stock count schedule automatically include new items added to inventory?
No. So what I would do, just to double check, is just to kind of go through a quick add process. Maybe take a quick look before I actually process that stock count the next time. If you're in a business that frequently adds SKUs, a place where I used to work would add upwards of 30 SKUs a month, just based on their own ingenuity. We would want to probably not use the reuse. But if you're in a pretty static environment, place where my dad works sells nuts and bolts, they've made the same nuts and bolts for the past 30 years. There's not a lot of change. The reuse is really, really, really handy.
Okay. How do we reconcile the unposted transactions when we are using the manufacturing module and have work in process?
So with the WIP, the inventory adjustments themselves, when I requisition a SKU into an actual manufacturing order, it's actually posting the inventory transaction. So for the unposted entries, if I haven't posted the requisition transaction, that's where I just need to take a look and say, okay, my on hand says that it's 20. Or I captured 20 on hand, but there's 10 sitting there unposted that I know got consumed in this WIP transaction. So for me, when it tells me that my variance was 10, I know that variance was actually 0. That is a case of needing to actually kind of take a look and apply the transaction itself. Now, if it's a bomb, an unposted bomb, but the requisition is posted, it shouldn't be taken into account.
All right, our last question in the queue here. And so again, if you got questions, type them in. All right, here's one: is can you reprint the reports at a later time?
The count sheets, is that?
That's a good question. Let me see if I can.
So
all right, hold on here. Okay, I took you off mute. Can you specify a little bit more about what reports you're asking about? Ezra? You're off mute? And it could be that
they may not have a microphone.
Yes, let me just go back to the question queue.
So with respect
to
the posting reports, yeah. There are ways to reprint the variance transactions posting report and the GL posting report. So you can go back and print those edit lists. But the stock count reports themselves, the ones that are coming up when I print, those ones I've never tried to reprint. So I don't believe that you can. I believe from that point you're looking at your accuracy report, or if you run some custom reports against the stock count history table, you can recreate the reports by using the same data.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience before we let Rod go? Type those in. Rod, this was meant to be a beginner course here for inventory folks. And so are there other resources or suggestions that you would have as a beginner in working with inventory that you'd like to shed here before we let folks go?
For the out-of-the-box inventory, there's actually, the documentation is actually pretty solid. The inventory module itself, there's been changes over the years, obviously, but a lot of the core functionality is really well documented, a wealth of knowledge online. Obviously, that's where I still go, online. But you know, the out of the box isn't probably going to meet every specific need. There are a lot of custom, I think I heard someone mention manufacturing. If you need to cycle count your WIP inventory, for example, you may need some more advanced warehouse management, more advanced tasks out there. And so there are a lot of tools out there as well if you find that this doesn't meet your needs. But from what I've seen, most distribution companies, most fairly simple warehouses, this is way more than they need.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. All right, one more thing here. Is there an automated barcoding scanning interface?
I wondered if anyone would ask me that. If I wanted to use barcodes and scanning with the standard GP, it's kind of like pretty much any other inventory window within GP. I have the option to use a keyboard wedge, which is really, it's a shortcut. It's not the same. I don't think it's the answer you're looking for. Keyboard wedge, I could attach it to my laptop, attach it to another device, and walk around the warehouse and scan that way. If you're looking for the proper handheld RF systems, you're probably looking for an add-on. If you're at that point, you probably want more advanced warehousing anyway, because you've probably got different picking requirements, like picking in waves or picking and then packing. If you're starting to get more advanced, you'll probably want to look at the data collection module from SalesPad, or the One Warehouse from SLS. Manhattan's out there as well. So there's a few different options depending how much you need to do and how much you want to spend. And for that, I'd say talk to your partner. If a standard keyboard wedge will do it for you, then yes, fill your boots.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Rod, so much for sharing your education here for folks to get a start on inventory. We certainly appreciate it. And again, if anyone has any other ideas, questions, suggestions, and all, Rod is a regular presenter for us. Don't be afraid to give him some suggestions, or with John Rivers at Data Masons, or myself, Kim at GPUG.com. We want to hear from you on what you want to learn, and we will find somebody to help bring that education to you. Thank you, Rod. Great job. And
Thanks, Kim.
we'll talk to everyone soon. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.